would be greatly appreciated. So today we're going to have a demo from Erwin from Platform 9. We're going to do some release updates, and then we have 2 SIG updates today, one from SIG Storage and one from SIG Big Data, and then we'll go into announcements. And with that, Erwin, you have 10 minutes. Take it away.
Okay. Screen. So, do you see the screen? Is the screen visible for everyone, or?
We can see it. Can you make your font a little bigger when you go back to the terminal?
I'll try.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. So I'm going to show you a bit what I did the last couple of months at Platform 9. We built a system called Vision Workflows, which basically in one line is a workflow engine for serverless applications built on Kubernetes. So by myself, I'm currently writing my thesis on scheduling in function as a service / microservice deployment. And I also work at Platform 9 on a system called Vision. So Vision is one of the major open source function as a service platforms for Kubernetes. It focuses on being fast and being very flexible. So I'm not going to tell you much about serverless or function service in general because there's not enough time. So I sort of assume that you all know a bit about serverless to follow the talk. Well, it's going to skip. So you've probably seen like some talks where someone demonstrates the function service platform with some simple function like transforming an image or fetching some weather data from an API. But as serverless are getting more popular, we're also getting into much more complex service applications. And this also implies more issues, such as that you suddenly have to, when you try to combine multiple serverless functions, you start to deal with communication logic, such as retries, dealing with long tail latencies, and so on. Something you don't want to be concerned as a user. There's quite some people in the server space who advocate like an event-driven approach to this. So basically, have a central event queue or message queue where functions emit events and listen for events. The problem here is what I see, and other people also, is that you get in some sort of spaghetti where it becomes very difficult to see which functions depend on which events and which events are redundant and so on. And finally, there's also the performance overhead. If you concatenate 10 functions, if you call them in sequence, then you'll have the cold start, which basically is the worst startup time, times 10. So it will multiply and become significant performance overhead. So workflows are originate from the scientific computing and from big data processing, or basically a workflow is just a collection of tasks that have dependencies on each other. And if you think of workflows in the context of function as a service, a task represents a function call. So that's where this talk's heading to. Is function service and workflows seem like a good idea because you offload complexity to the platform. Like the actual communication logic you provide, you just say to the platform that you depend on a certain task, and the platform will handle the communication between and where to discovering where the function is and so forth. Then there's also with this additional knowledge, you will get more power because the platform knows much more about the explicit dependencies between tasks. So you can do a lot of performance improvement. So, for example, a scheduler can already pre-boot a task, a function to ensure that you don't have the cold start anymore. And it also encourages composition and reuse of functions. So basically, you can just take from a library, you can take standard generic functions and mix and match them to fit your use case instead of having to write a function over and over again for a different use case. So Vision Workflows is basically our interpretation of this idea. Our main features of this are basically it's fault tolerant, so it uses an event sourcing approach where basically the whole system revolves around events, and even if the workflow engine goes down, it can rebuild the state from the saved events and can just continue where you left off, where it left off in the workflow executions. And then the other highlights are it's lightweight and also extensible. So there's no magic involved, or at least as little as possible. So, for example, there are some functions that are provided along with the workflow engine, but they don't use any private or secret API. They all use the same API that you as a user have access to. And finally, we really want to stress that basically workflows are just like any other function. So from a user perspective, you can just call workflow using the same API of Vision as you would do with a normal function. So if you stretch it, then you can even say that users should not even be aware of whether something is a workflow or a function, because they behave the same way. So I have a small demo prepared. I hope it works. Source code you can find here. So let me just quickly walk you through the abstract workflow. So this workflow represents like the bookmarking apps that use probably everyone knows, like the Pocket or Wallabag, which basically this workflow is takes in a URL, basically downloads the URL, parses from the HTML DOM. It parses an article, and it does some things with the image. It stores it in Redis, and then basically it notifies the user, and it composes a result to return to the user who evoked it. So there are two things here to notice. That basically the red box is basically another workflow. So you can just use it like any other function. Only in this workflow, there's basically a small scatter-gather pattern happening, where basically multiple functions are responsible for different parts of the article parsing, and there's one article composer which collects these parts and combines it to a final product. And then you have the orange one. That's basically a thing we call dynamic tasks. Basically, a dynamic task is a task that doesn't return data, but another function, another task. So in this case, this is some sort of if statement, which either based on a condition returns one or the other task. So that way you can basically, with dynamic tasks, you can change the whole control flow of your workflow. And also this API is also public, so you can create your own control flow constructs to create loops, create try catch things, and so forth. So now let's see if it actually works. Yeah. So like I said, you can just use it as basically. So let's just go to the yeah. So this is the workflow. I hope it's visible now for most people. Yeah, so a workflow basically consists of a collection of tasks. Each task has a unique ID which you can reference throughout the workflow. And each task, you specify which function to run. Well, it speaks for itself. And then you have basically the dependencies, which basically use requires to denote them. The task will only run after all the tasks that are required have completed. And then finally, you have in the inputs you have you can specify the input, and this weird, maybe a bit obscure notation is actually valid JavaScript. We have a small JavaScript interpreter which, for inputs, will interpret the expression. So you can basically reference any data from the workflow here. So basically, for example, this one references the output of some task called fetch web page, and this one references the input to the invocation. Yeah. So. And here you can see the dynamic task that basically returns a task instead of data. So yeah, so you can just use Vision syntax to invoke it. So for example, here I have a URL for a Medium post, and it should now. Basically, it will. Okay, well, it's already finished, so I can't really show you the internals, but it's a lot of logs. Trust me. So yeah, basically what happens is just the whole workflow engine run the whole workflow, and if you saw, and I'm not sure if you see it, the notification popped up here, and everything went well. How I'm doing on time?
You're coming up on the end.
Okay, so I'll just finish. Yeah, so there are a lot of other examples and a lot of details that I didn't cover, which I can't cover in 10 minutes. So let's just cover what we don't have yet. So we're currently working on a visualization GUI, a bit like the step functions of AWS and Azure Logic Apps, some sort of a GUI like that. The YAML notation you saw is just a front end for the actual workflow description. So it will be awesome to actually have something where you can have a DSL in Python or JavaScript that shows that allows you to describe your workflow. We want to improve. That's basically for my thesis. I want to improve still the smart scheduling. So I want to do some heuristic-based scheduling with where you profile tasks and try to predict when to actually run tasks to get the most efficient use of resources. Then we're also working on a function, like I discussed. There's a huge potential here for reusing functions. So we're also using. We're also working on a catalog where you can basically, like a Docker Hub, can push and pull your functions. And finally, there's also some interesting stuff going on for function versioning, where you can specify version in your workflow, and the workflow can do some A/B, almost A/B like migration to the new version of a task. Yeah, I think that's it. Well, thank you for watching.
We have time for maybe one question. Anyone from the audience?
Yeah.
Going once, going twice.
What languages do you support?
For functions?
Yes.
Currently, we support JavaScript, Python, any binary or any bash scripts, Ruby, and there's, I think, a JVM-based implementation coming up. So basically anything you can imagine. Well, the API for that's very simple, so it's not a lot of work to actually implement a new environment for a new language. I think it's a server of two endpoints which you have to implement.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Erwin. Moving on to release updates. 1.9.0 series. Anthony?
Hello, can you hear me?
Sound great.
All right, hi, this is Anthony. So as you mentioned, 1.9.0 Alpha 3 went out yesterday. Thanks to everyone who helped to keep those tests clean. We had the best signal so far with only, I think, a scalability test that was having trouble, but we reran it and looks good after that. So looking at good shape going into starting the beta season. You may have noticed that the milestone bot is now bugging you on your PRs in the milestone in addition to issues. We're doing this to help encourage some process around exactly what things are allowed to be put in the milestone when they're, as we start to enforce the milestone for PRs next week. And so that's going to be the same process you've been following for issues. Now you'll follow it for PRs to say not only is this an important issue that's for the release, but also this code change is approved for going into the release by SIG. So starting Monday, and things are going to have to be in the milestone and approved for the milestone in order to merge. We call that code slush. And that just means things that are not specifically targeting the release are going to have to wait starting then. The things that are targeting the release, you can still work on future work at that point, but we're kind of getting everything else out of the way for you for the home stretch. Then starting Wednesday next week, that's when we hit actual code freeze, meaning that not only do you have to be approved for the milestone, but you have to be approved as being a critical urgent priority in order to go in after that. And in addition to SIG approval, we're going to be, as a release team, monitoring things that are in that list and making sure that they make sense for that designation. And then Ihor, I don't know if you wanted to speak to this, but just I'll summarize. The feature spreadsheet is now available. There's a link in the doc. And if you have a feature that you're targeting for the release, please go and fill in the needs doc column so that we know that you're planning to write docs for that and we can track it. And that's all I have for 1.9.
Okay, great.
Clear if your PR is LGTM'd and approved by end of day Wednesday, it will get merged.
Hopefully we won't have a long line in the submit queue or broken tests. If we do, then we'll look at what things are in the queue at the time when we enable and apply labels as necessary.
Well, wait, LGTM, the answer is yes, right? LGTM approved by Wednesday.
The answer is it'll depend on the situation, but we're not going to guarantee that just being in there because if the tests are not passing, we can't guarantee that your thing is going to get in eventually. But that's something I can clarify and follow up with an email.
Alrighty, is that it for 1.9 then? Any other questions for 1.9? Okay, 1.8, is this you, Jace?
I put that in there. 1.8.3 is out. Some great fixes in there, so not much to say. And 1.7. I guess it'd be 11. I don't think there's an ETA on that yet.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments on the release process at all before we move on to the SIG updates? All right, moving on, SIG storage.
All right. So from the SIG storage side of things, we have 3 big features going into 1.9 that I'm going to highlight. The first big feature is block volume support. So far, the volume plugins in Kubernetes have only had file support, file system support. We're making big changes this quarter to enable block devices to be exposed inside containers. A handful of plugins will be enabled with that initially, and then over time we're going to upgrade more and more of the volume plugins to support that. The second feature is making the scheduler PV/PVC aware. This is a requirement for local storage. Thus far, the binding of a persistent volume claim to a persistent volume has been completely independent of the scheduler. And it's worked okay so far because the existing volume plugins assumed that the storage system was external to Kubernetes and it didn't need to be tracked as a cluster resource. But with local storage, the disk space is actually being pulled from the local node machine. And since that's a resource that we're taking from the cluster, the scheduler must be aware of it. And so the work being done this quarter is to make the scheduler aware of PV-PVC binding and allow PV-PVC binding to be delayed to scheduling. And the last big feature that we're working on is container storage interface support. This is something, the spec itself has been in the works since early this year, and now we are trying to implement alpha support. Basically, adding new volume plugins to Kubernetes has been challenging because it required you to either check code into Kubernetes and be aligned with our release cycle, or use flex volumes, which made deployment of the flex volume driver very challenging. With CSI, we're hoping to solve a lot of that pain, and it has broad industry support from other cluster orchestration systems and storage vendors, so we're excited about that. Beyond that, there's a ton of things that the storage SIG is working on. I posted a couple of links in this doc, including our biweekly meeting notes and our planning spreadsheet. Please feel free to take a look at that if you're interested in finding out what else we're working on. And please jump into the storage SIG meetings if you're interested in talking about anything.
One quick question, Sai.
Yes.
So the scheduler aware, the topology aware volume scheduling, that'll also work for PVs?
Yes.
And so the zonal affinity and any affinity should work now?
Yes.
Did everybody hear that question?
There's going to be a
George,
flag
did you hear that question?
that will enable the PV to delay, or PVC to delay binding until, because we want to make sure we take backwards compatibility.
Right, so it's a flag that you'll be able to use in order to say, I want this to actually work versus legacy behavior.
Yes.
Will you say what he asked?
Ken's question was around whether this feature that we're adding to the scheduler for local storage to delay PV-PVC binding is going to work broadly beyond just local storage for existing PV-PVC volumes. The way that the feature is designed, we're adding support to allow to make PV-PVC topology aware. And so yes, the answer to that is yes.
Is the dynamic provisioner going to respect it? I assume the reason Ken's asking is because of stateful sets.
Yes.
Stateful sets and just general being able to schedule any pod with affinity, any affinity specified along with the PVC, right?
Yep. And so the external provisioners for backwards compatibility, the default behavior doesn't change. It binds as soon as the PV-PVC is created. There's a new flag, a new field that's added to the PVC that delays binding. And so if that field exists, actually no, the external provisioners will need to be updated.
Yeah, that would be great because I think that's the biggest foot gun for zonal stateful sets. So thanks.
Yep, good point.
All right, any other questions for storage? All right, moving on to SIG Big Data. Eric?
Hey there. Yeah, so my first time at this meeting. If I do something wrong, I apologize in advance. But so I guess there's three like substantial projects going on under the aegis of the Big Data SIG right now. The big one is, of course, back-end scheduler for Spark. To interface directly to Kubernetes. And then there's also been some work recently with giving a kube backend for Jupyter Hub. And then blanking on the third one, but oh yeah, the Airflow guys. So anyway, the state of Spark on Kube right now is that we've begun the upstreaming process, and we're hoping to get a sort of minimal viable product in for the 2.3 release. We've got the first pull request almost to review, just kind of like a long tail of comments going through, and then Anirudh has the next pull request mostly ready, and we're just kind of like massaging that so we can actually attach to the upstream. So they pushed back the date for 2.3, which helped us a fair amount because we were kind of pushing up against the boundary. And I believe that the Airflow guys are like 2 to 3 weeks from a code freeze for the work that they're doing. They're also holding a big meetup if you're in the San Francisco area and want to see what those guys are doing. I believe it's December 4th. Check that out. What else is going on? So on the Jupyter Hub front, my understanding of the issues that they're really dealing with right now is one, multi-tenancy, which of course is always an issue for everybody. And then also I think they want to support the ability to have a back end for notebooks that's not limited to a single namespace. So I believe that's like a hard limit right now. They have to choose a namespace to be in, and they'd like to make that configurable and not limited to just one. So that's kind of what I'm aware of the state. That's essentially the update. I see increased participation of people showing up at these meetings, the Wednesday meetings, and wanting to contribute demos and
Hardships.
Yeah. So it's actually been nice to see see it happen. For quite a while, it was mostly like the Spark on Kube people. Now it's getting a lot more diverse. So it's I'd like to see that kind of healthy growth. I think I see Anirudh over there if he has anything to add, but no. That was all I had to say about it.
Yeah. Do we have any questions for SIG Big Data? Okay, we're really burning through these SIG updates quickly. Is there any SIG rep on board that wants anything to add for any SIG update?
I can add something real quick for SIG architecture.
Sure.
We are still not getting a ton of traction on people bringing architecture reviews to the SIG. So if you're interested in doing that and you're a SIG leader, or you have some questions about any API changes you want to make that might be architecturally related, put them in our agenda, which is bit.ly/sig-architecture. And we'll definitely discuss that. It's really important to have a nice open discussion on those things, and that's the place to do it. So,
okay. Any other SIG related business before we move on? All right, moving on to the announcements. Just a reminder, it's holiday next week, so please don't show up for this meeting. DevStats, Paris, do you want to do the quick shout out here for this?
A quick shout out is if you're not familiar with DevStats, to please check it out. It's an awesome project that CNCF has been working on. devstats.cates.io, links in the notes. We are trying to figure out what meaningful graphs and charts and things to display for this meeting, as well as your SIG meetings and things like that. So SIGs, please help us in determining what would make your lives easier through data. You can also file tickets and issues and questions and things like that on the link in the notes as well. What else do I have? Oh, also, if you're looking for like a what is this, how do I work this, etc., there is a birds of a feather at KubeCon for DevStats. Did I put the date on there? I did not put the date on there. I think it might be the Friday, but don't quote me. But it is on the schedule on the KubeCon website. But that's it.
Okay. And I just have a quick announcement that the Helm community meetings, which is happening as part of SIG Apps, and SIG GCP now have their own YouTube playlist. So they now have a place where they're keeping their video archives of their individual meetings. And with that, back over to Paris for mentoring.
Two things, actually. One, we'd like to pilot a contributor office hours, very similar to George's users group that he has on the third Wednesdays. We're looking to do this on the last Wednesdays of the month, and I'm looking for volunteers to field questions. You would need to be member plus on the contributor ladder. Ideally, approvers and reviewers would be awesome. If you're interested in helping out with that, again, this is just a pilot to see if this is even feasible. So I have not done a lot of advertising for it. I want to make sure that we get enough volunteers to field those questions first. Questions would probably be like, hey, what SIG do I join? How do I figure that out? That kind of thing. So please get with me on that. You can reach out to me on Slack, Paris, Paris. The second thing is we will proceed with a test cohort for a group mentoring project that we have for Contributor Ladder. Most likely at the end of the month. If you're interested in seeing the deck for that, as well as just giving feedback or have any ideas for mentoring in general, just reach out to me and we'll take it from there.
Great.
I actually do plan on demoing too once we're in the heat of the test cohort and have a little bit more down, and I'll demo at this meeting.
Okay, awesome. Any questions about the mentorship program for Paris? Let me just check the chat real quick. Okay, moving on to the last announcement. The OpenStack Development Summit was last week, and they've published a ton of videos, and there's a lot of Kubernetes-related content on there, so you might want to check it out. And that's the last official announcement. Does anyone have anything else that they want to announce or tell people about? Okay, and with that, you almost get a half hour back. So thanks, everybody, for powering through this, and we will see everyone in 2 weeks.
Thanks for hosting, George.
Thanks for taking notes, Jace.
Thanks, everybody.